All right. So I just discovered that when you think that the video is gone out, you probably should not curse because then you have to go figure out how to edit a movie in a short period of time. So, picking this back up, gains from trade, specialization. Under specialization, we can get more specific. Obviously, as I mentioned, specialization is limited by the extent of the market. Larger markets mean higher degrees of specialization are feasible, which is one of the reasons why going to New York City is a phenomenal thing, because there is a host of whatever you want. Not only are there Chinese restaurants, there are Chinese restaurants specializing in regional cuisines. There are American restaurants specializing in hyper-regional cuisines. There are Indian restaurants and specializing in very regional cuisines. Here in Billings, we're lucky to have two Indian restaurants, and Indian food is not really a homogenous thing. When I go visit my friends in Winnipeg, uh, my friend Chris's wife, they immigrated from Punjab to Winnipeg, and I get to have fabulous Punjabi food, not just fabulous Indian food, but very regional food. Now, having restaurants that will support that, we're not nearly large enough as a market. But let's set that to one side. That's an important point to remember. This is one of the reasons why we would want to have really large markets, is we can tolerate higher levels of specialization. But specialization, how did that move from being a boon, from being a bane to being a boon? How did that move from being, if you specialized, you would likely starve rather than thriving? Basically, that's a slightly different question, but how does specialization, assuming we have a large enough market, specialization creates value or allows more valuable trades? And as we talked about last class, one of the reasons is because people have different abilities. Not everybody has the same abilities. Now we're going to come up with a subpoint next here called comparative advantage. It turns out comparative advantage is not an essential part of why there are gains to be had from specialization in trade. I think it's an important analytic point, but really, for the time being, we can largely ignore it. Because again, how often do you think everybody has the same abilities? In order for us to have no gains from specialization in trade, we would have to have the same endowments, the same preferences, and the same abilities. In addition, even if everybody had the same abilities and we specialized, we would end up being more productive in the long run, because along the way we're going to learn things about how to be more productive. We've all seen this happen, right? By this point in our lives, or at least for me, by this point in my life, I have learned a lot about how to do, fold, and put away laundry. I can be fairly effective at it. Now, if I did it full time and specialized to an even greater extent, I would almost certainly learn things along the way. So, even if we start out with the same endowments and the same preferences and we have the same abilities, eventually there would still be gains to be had from specialization and trade, not just specialization. We need the trade for it to make sense if there was room to learn by doing. But even if all of those things weren't true, if we had the same endowments, the same preferences, the same abilities, and there wasn't any room to learn, we could still save on switching time. Again, this is the major reason why Henry Ford and the moving assembly line made a difference. Really was saving on switching time. Now, within 5 years of that, I suspect some people who had been tasked with a specific aspect of the assembly line learned. And eventually they may even have started testing people to try and figure out where their abilities would generate the most value within the production process. But again, these here are the reasons why there are gains to be had from trade. So, as we talked about, I would argue that we almost certainly always have gains from specialization in trade. Why? Because almost never are all of these things true. Of course, by the same token, how often do we trade with people? There are aspects of our lives where we don't trade with people. So there must be something on the cost side. I'm going to stop this here and continue discussing that.